Lisa, how you doing?
Hey, Elliot, I'm good. How are you?
Good. So we are launching today our joint podcast, which is very exciting. What's it called? You came up with the name of it. Tell everyone what it's called.
What they don't tell you about doing business in ... Yes.
Excellent. Because I think when you're researching to go into a new country, a new territory, there's a whole load of obvious information you can get from either the official channels or Google or ChatGPT. But when I was talking to you and preparing this, it just seemed there's a bunch of hidden things which are super useful to know in advance.
It would, yes.
And over the course of this podcast and following podcasts, hopefully we're going to shed some light on that.
Hope so.
Should we do a couple of intros, because people will want to know why we are even remotely qualified to discuss anything?
It's a good question. So I'm Lisa Shephard. I'm based in Miami, Florida. I've been here for 8 years. I have a business called Altus Works. And essentially what we do is we help international businesses land in the United States, but that's purely from a commercialization standpoint. So you have a product or service, you want to get traction here before you start spending a bunch of cash. That's essentially what we do. And then when you're ready to go, we'll put you in touch with all the relevant partners that you need. Super important to do, but we'll come on to that in a second. And then I was lucky enough to meet Elliot last year at an event. And I will hand over to Elliot so he can share what he does.
Thank you. Referring to me in the third person. Excellent. Hi, everyone. I'm Elliot Zissman. My company is called Phase 2, and I help businesses, or we help businesses at Phase 2 land into the UK market. We do that primarily through outbound activities on LinkedIn. And I've been doing this for far too many years, working with international companies from South Africa, from Canada, from other parts of the world, and being their sort of feet on the street in London. And now we do that for we've done it for about 100 companies since launching Phase 2 6 years ago. So excited to see if I can help on the bit about what they don't know, what they don't tell you about doing business in the UK when we come on to that episode.
Yes, wonderful.
But why don't we start with you?
Yes.
What they don't tell you, our audience, about doing business in the US. So I'm going to ask a few, if it's okay with you.
Bring it on.
Or a couple of questions away and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
So I guess the first thing is, if someone was setting up a business in the US for the first time, what's something that would really catch them off guard? Something that, stuff that no one tells you.
Gosh, there's so many things. But I think the biggest one is that you are dealing with essentially over 50 different countries in one place. And I think that's how you need to look at it. And I believe a lot of people just assume, wow, I'm going to conquer the US and it's just going to be all encompassing and I'm going to hit every single state and it's going to be amazing. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work like that. Every single state is different laws, different legislation, and to some extent, culturally, East Coast versus West Coast, very different. Same with the center of the United States. Everyone's got their area of expertise. So it's really understanding, your products and service and where it's going to be able to resonate quickest first. And your product or service might not take off in every single state. It just depends what you're doing. So I think that's the biggest thing, the amount of people that come to me and say, I want to start on the East Coast and the West Coast. And I'm like, that's like a very big area. So it's a lot of states.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you, I suppose, you've got to pick a starting point, right? And maybe there's some obvious things if you are in the movie industry, you're going to start in LA. If you're in finance or that kind of thing, probably more New York. If you're in automotive, you're probably in Detroit.
Yes.
There's some obvious things, but are there other factors, or how do you advise people about where to start?
Yeah, do the research, understand where the opportunities are first, to be able to really scale. And I guess that's part of your sort of go-to-market strategy, is where are the opportunities, where are your potential clients? So therefore, where do you need to start to target? And it sounds obvious, but it isn't necessarily obvious to everybody. So I think having a very focused, targeted approach to start small and grow is the best way to do it, because entering any market, as we know, is super expensive. It doesn't matter where you're going to be growing your business globally, even if it's a digital business, an online business, which most are. There are still so many factors that you need to take into consideration before you do that. So understand what you're dealing with first.
I think, there's obviously, there's things like tax for one. I suppose I've always given advice to people in some way. I've said, look at the time zone. If you're in Europe, certainly in the UK, 5 hours to 8 hours left to right makes a heck of a difference, right?
And if you're only a smaller business and you're not able to cover the time zone, from a customer service perspective, you need to really think about that, right? Because if you're starting to launch your product or service in the US, there's an expectation, and that's a cultural thing. There is an expectation that you are going to be able to be responsive straight away, right? So there's, none of this, they're in the UK, it's 7 o'clock there, they're probably not going to answer. No, the expectation is, I want an answer. You're selling into the US, you better respond. So again, I think that's, that is definitely something you need to think about. And the same if you were going to Asia, right? That there needs to be an understanding that, okay, you can cover that time zone within reason from the get-go.
Okay, yeah, that's a really important factor, I think.
Yeah.
My background's all around LinkedIn. Well, background has been for the last 6 years. But there's many different ways to build relationships, get out there, networking, things like that. How does that work typically in America, and so especially given it's such a vast place?
I think it's not too dissimilar to the UK, right? And we'll come on to the UK in the next episode. But I think if you need to grow your brand awareness, especially in the markets where you're going to focus, and you can start doing that remotely. But again, it depends on the type of product or service that you're selling. If it's something that is a consultative, you need to meet with them, you need to, maybe do a demo, you need to, really get behind what they're doing, then there's an element of, yes, you can do that from afar, but then it'll only take you to a certain point. I've got some really great examples of great British companies that have started selling from the UK, and it took them to a certain point. And then they were like, oh, we're kind of struggling now. We've hit a bit of a ceiling. And that's because people here are like, well, are you in America? Where are you based? And then that gets into that conversation of, you can have a US number, you can say you're in New York, you can say you're in Miami, but you're not. And so, I've had experiences of, representing clients going to events and saying, oh, I spoke to this person last week. They said they were going to be here. And I'm thinking, they're never going to be here. They're in London. So you can do that to a point, but then there's going to be an expectation that there's an individual or there is some kind of presence in the United States. And that's when you really need to get serious about it.
Yeah. Having a physical presence is critical for those times when people want face-to-face meetings. You can only do you can get so far online.
Exactly.
It does depend on, I think, the size of the deals that you're working with. Yeah. If it's, online transaction can be 50 quid, $50, probably okay. But if you multiply that by 1,000 or 10,000.
Exactly. And I think it's that, when you're doing those consultative type sales where it is a lot of money and it's potentially a change in behavior or, implementing a whole new platform or process or whatever it is, where you have to get multiple stakeholders involved. Yeah, it helps. And yes, you can come here 3 or 4 times a year and have those meetings. But again, that's expensive and it becomes very time consuming. And if you're trying to run a business from another country, it's very hard. So it's got to be, I think, a mix. And then at that point, you have to make a decision. Okay, am I really 100% in the US market? If I am, let's go for it. Let's set up a presence here. Yeah.
Very true. What do you think are some of the unspoken rules of doing business in the US? The kind of stuff that can really make or break things, but no one actually talks about.
I think depending on where you're coming from, and I don't know how controversial to get here. So
we need the subscribers. We need the subscribers to go controversial.
Let's go for it. So I think it depends who you're dealing with in the US. There's always going to be an element of distrust of people who are from other countries to some extent, right? Whether that's right or wrong, it happens. And so if you're calling from a call center from the other side of the world, that's really tough, right? I would say that most people here not open to having a discussion with someone who's in a call center. And it's obvious when you're talking to someone who's from a call center, they will not want to necessarily do business with you. I think if you're from the UK, honestly, they love the accent. As soon as you start talking, it's like, oh my God, I love your accent. I can't do an American accent. But it creates an element of trust. Again, whether that's right or wrong, our accent has that feeling of, that they're from England. Clearly, I have to trust them, right?
Yeah. Is it true that American people sometimes struggle to differentiate between different accents? Are they like, do you know the Beatles? Or like, no, I can tell nowhere from. You can tell I'm not from Liverpool.
But again,
is it the same?
Yes, look, if you're not in a business or in a role that you're dealing with people from the UK, you won't necessarily hear it straight away. Maybe you'll hear the Scottish accent, for example, or Irish. But from England, not so much. People don't really hear the different dialects. And I think because we are watching the US has Hollywood, so we've been exposed to different accents within the United States from a very young age. We know the Southern accent, maybe we'll know a New York accent, maybe a Boston accent, but I can't, beyond that, I couldn't pinpoint someone was from Philadelphia. And trust me, I've been asked, I'm like, did you not know I was from Philadelphia? I'm like, no. I don't know. I'm
not going to criticize anyone. Exactly right. To my ears, Liverpool, Birmingham, London,
so different.
Wales, very different. But then I can't tell the difference between Philly and Detroit.
Exactly. So I think, it's the exact same thing. It's difficult, but there will also hit, when you're sort of speaking to someone, sometimes they'll find it difficult to understand you, irrelevant of where you are from the UK, just because of the words that we use. And I think being really aware of that, because, even things like saying lift instead of elevator, they might not know what a lift is. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and the best one is when I say to people, I see them, instead of saying, hey, how are you? I go, you're right. Because that's just what we say. And they look at me. It happened to me literally the other day. And he's like, yeah, why? Why wouldn't I be all right? And I'm like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's like a British thing. You forget.
I think the two that always I'm always conscious of is the fact that in England we would call something I'll check my diary means calendar, and an American diary something very different.
Yeah.
My favorite of all time was asking my boss from New York at the time. He was in London. I said, can I get you a coffee? And he's like, yeah, sure. I was like, how do you take it, black or white? And he looked at me like, well, kind of brown. He just didn't understand the whole concept of a white coffee wasn't something that was there.
Yeah.
I think that, I think one of the biggest challenges must be, especially for you helping companies grow into America, that because of Hollywood, which you mentioned earlier, because of the amount it's on television, we sometimes think we know a place when we don't.
Yes.
And that because of language, it actually works vice versa between America and the UK as well. But there's going to be some things, and maybe we can wrap up on this one with there's going to be something that will about how Americans do business that just might surprise someone who's not from them. Is there, maybe it's the not knowing what we would call white coffee is, and they're like, it's not even a thing. But is there something that you can kind of think when it comes to doing business in the US? Here's something you wouldn't even think about, and if there's one thing that would surprise you,
I think it's how easy it is to speak to people here. I think especially if you've come from Europe, where it's really hard to get in front of people generally. I have always found that most people are willing to have a conversation or respond to you, even if it's a no thank you, right? And I think that surprises a lot of people and gives a little bit of false hope, because they might want to talk to you, but they're not necessarily buying, right? And sometimes you can get a bit overexcited and they're just genuinely, oh, what is this? And then you have a whole conversation, you think you're in there and actually you're not at all. So I think it's great, you can have a lot more meetings, but I would always say qualify your leads in a much more detailed fashion, because I've been caught out by that. Are you
talking about like when you're picking up the phone to someone doing a call?
Yeah, or you're doing your LinkedIn outreach or whatever it is, and you get really positive responses, and you think, "Oh, this is amazing," but the actual conversion to an actual sale it's still difficult. So I think there's always an assumption that yes, the US is going to be much easier. It is definitely much easier to speak to people and get in front of people, and you meet them at networking events. Let's swap cards, let's swap details, let's chat. And I think also it's cultural. I've heard, but I've not spent a lot of time on the West Coast, but I've heard there's a lot more kind of on the West Coast people saying things and then not following through. That's a generalization, but I have heard that, but I haven't myself done that much business on the West Coast. So, yeah,
sure.
something to be aware of.
Well, anything else you'd like to, you think you want to say on this topic that I haven't asked a question about? You're very welcome to say a few things.
I think, look, US is a great place to do business. Whatever you think politically right now, 2025 has started with a very positive vibe, I would say, here from a business perspective. Yes, everyone's, you're going from an English-speaking country, if you're coming from the UK, to an English-speaking country, but we don't speak the same language. And that's what I would always leave on, that you are still dealing with a very different multiple cultures in the US. And I think it's important to bear that in mind. And also, preparation is the key.
Well, maybe what we'll do in future episodes is drill into that 50 countries in one, bring in them from California, from Texas. I'm not going to name all 50 states, just I couldn't. But you know what, Lisa, this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next time we come back, I think you're going to be chatting to me about what people need to know that they don't know about doing business in the UK.
Yeah.
So until then, thanks very much for watching and listening, and we'll see you soon.